Lauren, thank you for joining us today. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. I think the forum that you started, Liv, is just such an awesome, safe place for people to connect. And I'm a big believer in multiple pathways to recovery, as we'll get into in discussion. So I really appreciate what you're doing for the recovery community. I think I'll start with a little story, if that's okay.
Liv, stories.
Yeah. When you were a teenager, Liv, did you ever fight with your parents?
Continually.
Yeah. I think a lot of us did, and I was no exception. And I remember one particular fight with my mom. No idea what the fight was about, but I remember the feeling I had during and after the fight, just this pent up anger and, teenage angst, and just no idea what to do with it or where to put it. And so what I did is I hopped on my bike and I rode over to my dad's across town, where I knew the house would be empty, but the fridge would be full of beer. And so I opened that fridge, cracked open a beer, and took a swig. And it was like, as I drank that beer, all that angst, all that anger, all that pain just sort of melted away and floated away. And I felt so much better. And you all know what I did. I opened that fridge and I had a second one. And, I was probably 15. I don't know if it was I don't think it was my first drink or anything like that, but it's the first time I can remember using alcohol to cope and to take away what I was feeling and really use it as a crutch to soothe my soul, find some stress relief, block out my mother and my, all my teenage problems. And the next 10 years were characterized by heavier and heavier drinking until I eventually found cocaine as a way to drink even more, and found myself in a deep, dark depression where I just couldn't stop drinking. So that's kind of how I got to this path of recovery, and I didn't know what to do at that point. I remember going to my first 12-step meeting. I didn't want to go to 12-step meetings. My mom was like, "Oh, I know in there, it's like a total cult. Don't do that." But at the same time, you need to fix what you're doing, and there don't seem to be any resources out there. So I thought I'd try, and I sobbed through my first couple of meetings, and then I drank through the next few, and just didn't know what to do with myself, and my family was very uneducated about alcohol and alcoholism. So that's kind of how I wound up here. And I don't want to go too much into all my story. But 13 years. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm curious about, you talked about not wanting to be in AA, and I think this is a really important point. Just in general, in terms of like our solutions for addiction is, what is it about AA that makes us not wanting to go? You mentioned your mum said it was a cult. I'm curious about what you felt were, what were the feelings surrounding not wanting to be there? What were your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think, just heavy amounts of stigma, just around, one, getting to a state of being alcoholic in the first place, and two, having to admit that you need help. And then, back then it was like, AA was hidden in like church basements, and people, smoked cigarettes, and it was just, I think a lot of the anonymity piece, and a lot of what I'll talk about today is like that anonymity piece of keeping it hidden and keeping a part of yourself hidden, I think is just it was a dangerous place for me. And I think it also just perpetuates that that intense stigma that surrounds it. And so, you know, my mom, loving as she was, that was just her perception of, oh my God, you're going to go join this cult. Like, can't you just not drink, or, you know, something like that. And then when I got there, I felt like I didn't belong. You know, I had fair share of adverse childhood experiences, but not like epic traumas. And I had graduated from college. I had a degree, and, you know, in my mind, AA was for you know, someone living on the street drinking out of a paper bag. And that's just the perception that I had 15 years ago or whenever it was that I first tried to go.
And I think, I feel like, from my perspective, that's that was the ultimate audience for AA, right? I mean, that like fall down drunk is, you know, the description of the founders, right? Bill W. That's the extent of his drinking and where his alcohol use disorder got him. So I feel like, you know, that, I mean, and that's something that I mirror. You know, I felt like, oh my God, I've got to this stage, like it's gotten that, I've let myself get this bad.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just that kind of shame and self-punishment, and you know, and I think that still exists. And it's unfortunate, because I think that people feel like there's no middle of the road solution, but I feel like that's changing, so that they continue with their drinking in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you felt these fears. How long did you stay in 12-step for?
Well, so yeah, and that fear and that shame and that like self-loathing really carried itself through years of my recovery. And sorry, the the two-year-old pipes in every now and then.
I think we need to show that we are people in recovery, right? We have
children.
Hi.
Junie, can you say hi? This is Juniper.
Hi.
She didn't consent to being on YouTube, but I'm sure she'd love it. So 13 years ago, I was, it's working, sweetie. It's working. I'm sorry. I apologize. My husband had to work today. So here we are.
Real life in recovery.
So 13 years ago, I was waiting. Yeah, I was waiting tables at a restaurant at the pier in Newport Beach. I live in Orange County in California. And the manager brought out a tray of cocktails. It was like the seasonal drink menu, and he wanted the wait staff to try them all. And so that we could better upsell everybody on the new drink menu. And I just panicked. No one knew I had just spent 4 months in treatment, getting sober for the first time, actually really getting sober. And I was still living, and no one knew I was living in a sober living. I was riding my bike to work every day because I had sold my bike to help pay for treatment. And I was going to 6 a.m. meetings every day as a requirement of my sober living. And in my mind, it was just this, oh my God, I absolutely cannot tell anybody that I'm sober. I can't tell anybody that I'm in recovery. That is too embarrassing. There's too much shame in that. But at the same time, I was trying to be sober, so I didn't know which was worse. And so I tried to pretend like I was busy at the restaurant, and the manager pestered me to put down what I was doing. And so, you know, I caved, and I lifted each glass, and I just pretended to drink. I just dipped in a straw and pretended to drink. But just the amount of fear and anxiety, and I was so desperate for relief after that shift that I dipped into a liquor store right next door after my shift, bought a couple little vodka bottles, and drank them as fast as I could. And as I sat there alone in the alley, I looked at those empty bottles and I could hear like the clamor and the joyful sounds of the bar nearby. And I knew I could no longer be a part of that world. But my new world was just so incredibly shameful and lonely and scary. And I just felt horrible. And I hopped on my bike. I managed to sneak in my sober living without waking anybody up, and dreaded getting up for that morning meeting. But so, and I tell this story because that shame that I carried through, not just through 12-step, but through treatment and all these things. And the next few, maybe like, I don't know, 6 weeks or 2 months when I was in that outpatient and sober living, every time I drank, they would punish me. They would send me to detox, which cost my family another $1,500, whether or not I needed detox, but it was a punishment. You had to be, isolated from the rest of your group and sent away in shame. And I experienced the same thing later, coming back into AA every time. I had to take newcomer chips for 30 days, and it just felt so shameful. And it was always, oh, what are you going to do different? You need to work the program. You're not working the program hard enough. Not that the program might not be right for me, but that I'm broken and not doing something right. And that was just how I felt. And so, feeling really defeated after those couple of setbacks while I was still in treatment, I thought back to this woman, Chris, who was the athletic program leader at my first treatment center. And she just was so full of life and energy. And for 1 hour every day, she had us in the gym or in the pool, laughing and sweating. And it was the only hour in those really dark, scary days of treatment where I felt like myself. I felt like, oh, I might actually get through this. And so suddenly the perfect get well job, and don't even get me started on the get well job concept, because that was a whole other, source of shame for me. But I was like, I could get a job at the gym. And so I did. I got a job at the gym, and which was perfect. It came with a gym membership that I couldn't afford anymore. And it wound up being a good environment for me, where, of course, being new in recovery, it wasn't perfect. I was working out a little too much. I was drinking too much caffeine and eating too much sugar. And so I still had challenges, but finding, a safe place to work and all the exercise helped me get off the antidepressants they had been shoving down my throat for years trying to fix me, was a helpful thing getting into the fitness industry. But so anyway, I don't remember what your original question was there, but yeah, it was just that toxic shame carrying through my recovery kept me in this cycle of relapsing even after months, a year of sobriety. Every time I had to go back to AA, I just felt this compounded shame and like I was starting over, and just horrified at the fact that I, this really smart person, couldn't get it as I was being told in 12-step. So
yeah, and I think that's, it's just so harmful, right? Is this belief that we need to be broken down to be brought back up again is, I just think is so flawed, right? Because, and I think Holly Whitaker said this first, was that, women don't have an ego when they come into 12 step. I mean, I can't speak for men, but we don't have an ego, so we don't need breaking down. And what we actually, we need is to build self-esteem and not focus on what's wrong with us. So you felt that shame. You started at the gym. Do you want to go on?
No, actually, you bring up a great point of, and you brought up a couple times in the forum this week about feelings of empowerment and recovery capital and things like that. And it wasn't until much later that I realized how much that that like mantra that goes on in 12-step of needing to be broken down and needing to smash your ego was actually incredibly harmful for me, because like you said, I was already broken. My self-esteem and the shame that I carried was already there, and then, you know, to be told that I needed to lower myself even further, just wasn't helpful for me, particularly with, you know, that get well job concept and things like that.
Yeah,
so
I think it was really harmful for me too. So you, I forget my original question. So we were talking about at what point you left.
So you know, there was one particularly bad relapse that landed me in a detox and doing a little bit of outpatient for a little while, where I was left determined to change. I still didn't know I had any other option other than 12 steps. So I actually dove harder into 12 step at that point. But in my work and personal life, I went back to my boss at the gym where I had called in sick and was a terrible employee for a couple of months, and shared with her this vision I had for becoming a personal trainer and actually helping people go through transformations at the gym. I had been inspired by, even though I felt like I was starting over again, I was going through a personal transformation and wanted to share that with others. And she believed in me. She went to the leadership team and all of them believed in me and said, absolutely, Lauren's going to be amazing at that. And they paid for me to get certified. And then didn't demote me down to a trainer. I was already in a management position. They left me in a management position and just transferred me. So all of a sudden, I'm this brand new trainer, teaching other trainers and managing trainers who'd been master trainers for years, 10 decades. And, and here's me like green and not knowing what I'm doing. And but they believed in me, and I was really good at it. And just having that just support and some people that believed in you meant a lot, and it changed a lot. And I didn't even realize how much at the time, how much that was like a, you know, turning point in my life. And at the same time, I enrolled to become a holistic health practitioner, and went through this year-long program. And I went through it with the idea that, okay, well, you know, I have this background in biochemistry, and I would always nerd out at like the vitamins and the metabolic pathways and like the very little nutrition that we studied in school. And I went into it thinking, okay, my clients need help with nutrition, I'm going to help them. And this school just changed my life. We studied over 100 different dietary theories, and there were two things that really kind of started to light some light bulbs in my head. And one was this theory that there's no one right diet for everyone, which seems pretty intuitive now. You know, you think about, well, that's why, you know, some people choose veganism and they feel amazing, they feel great. Other people choose veganism and they wind up feeling not so great. And so and it's like, well, you know, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Could that be possible in recovery also? And then the other thing they taught was this concept of primary foods, which if you're probably familiar with that guy Maslow's laws. They're actually very, very similar, but that there's 4 primary foods that feed us. They're not actually foods, but it's spirituality, some sort of spiritual connection, whatever that is and whatever that looks like for you. 2 is a sense of purpose, whether that's your career or vocation or, you know, volunteering, whatever that is, parenting. 3 is your relationships, so both your close relationships and also the community that you surround yourself with. And the fourth one is your physical relationship to your body. So what you're putting in and how much you're exercising, what kind of exercise you're doing, and things like that. And, you know, those things have to be in balance in order to achieve, you know, true, both emotional and physical health, and mental health. And that made so much sense to me. It was like, oh, okay. And it's not too unlike, you know, in 12 step, they talk a lot about mind, but, you know, the triangle or whatever, but I didn't find that it really helped me kind of complete that triangle. It was like, okay, we're hammering our stories and talking about our stories over and over and over again, but is that really helping our mind, body, spirit? I don't know. But so anyway, so I started to change how I was living and trying to get those things more in balance. I stopped working out for 2 hours a day. I started doing more yoga. I started cutting back on caffeine and sugar, and started, that was weird, I started sleeping better. And so, so I just started to do so much better physically, and then pursue some things, some other things, like yoga and sound healing meditation. I've never been able to meditate, but I can lay there and listen to a gong for an hour, and that's pretty cool. So that just helped me put some things into perspective. But I was, like I said, I still was very involved in AA at that point, and I stayed sober for about 4 years. Going to AA, doing the deal as they call it, and being the secretary and all that stuff, and just hearing the same things over and over and over again from people. And eventually, I was making all these strides outside of AA, and I felt like it was this anchor that, okay, that repetitive nature that happens in the 12-step rooms, for me, felt like it was actually holding me back. Instead of, I was like, okay, well, but I'm ready to move past all that. Like, why do I have to keep, on this other hamster wheel? I went from one hamster wheel to a different hamster wheel. And I did drink one more time. I made a conscious decision to start drinking again. I was in a relationship with someone who was not sober. He drank a lot, and I was very secure in my sobriety and thought that was cool, and eventually realized that I just couldn't connect with him without going back to drinking. And that was my attempt to improve that relationship. And when I was ready to get sober, I drank maybe for 6 months, sometimes drank okay, sometimes not, and wound up on a 3-day bender. And that really kind of solidifies for me. I have a belief now that people can choose recovery however they want, and for some people that looks like moderation. I don't know that I can do that. I feel like I tried that in that period. I still had a lot of the AA mantras in my head, so you never know. But anyway, when I decided to get sober again, I started seeing a therapist, and I started doing a couple things, but one was seeing a therapist, and he helped me identify what it was, some of the things in 12-step that made it re-traumatizing for me. And he helped me realize that it was okay to find recovery without it. I had no idea that was okay. You get told by so many people, like, if you don't go to meetings, you're going to die. And yes, the book says we don't have a monopoly, but really it's the only way. And
because it's kind of like, this is the gold standard. This is the thing that everybody knows about. This is how to recover. I love that your therapist validated those feelings. What, would you mind sharing those specific concerns that he teased out?
Yeah. So he helped me kind of identify that, one, identifying as an alcoholic, and now in my work that I'll tell you all about, but there's power in words, and to me that word was shameful and stigmatizing. And what, I'm Lauren, I'm doing all this, like, I'm living life, like, why do I have to introduce myself as Lauren the alcoholic every time I meet another person in recovery? And so that was hard. That was something that I struggled with all since day one in AA, and he helped me realize that, like, oh, there's actual there's actual reasons why that might be bothering you, not just. And it wasn't because, and in 12 step they tell you, well, that's because you just don't want to admit, you don't want to fully admit that you're alcoholic. And it's like, no, I know I can't drink. I know that, you know, I wound up very sick. I just don't need to say it every day. I don't, that's not helpful for me. And then retelling stories and hearing other people's war stories and would just bring up all the old shit, for lack of a better term. And he said that's re-traumatizing. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. And also at the same time as that, I started reading some books that were really helpful for me. And I was actually going to these workshops with this woman with a PhD in metaphysics, which I won't even go into. I didn't wind up going down the whole road of metaphysics, but I started learning about the idea of neuroplasticity, which is the idea that the things that we repeat, both the things that we say to ourselves and the things that we repeat, create grooves in our brains, and it's why we create habits. It's why you know, things that we do every day get reinforced. And I read a book called The Power of Neuroplasticity. It's by Shad Helmstetter, and you can change it. You can change all these grooves in your brain that are creating, you know, one of the things I learned is that, you know, our thoughts turn into our behaviors in some shape or form. You know, you may think, oh, I want to kill that person. You're not going to go kill that person, but your thoughts are creating your behaviors, and your behaviors are creating your circumstances. And so that was a big aha moment for me, because that's everybody with a brain has this ability to, one, change their brain, and also this ability to create all these habits that are destructive. And so I started to realize, I also read Unbroken Brain by Maya Salovitz, which was just huge. That was so helpful for me to realize, oh, I'm not broken. But I started to realize that, you know, people who are suffering from substance use disorder of any form are not different than any other human. We're suffering from this, like, human condition. And you know, part of what I struggled with so much in early recovery was the fact that I had this, like, shattered sense of self. There was the me that went to meetings, and there was the me that was outside of meetings, and neither one felt like the real me, because they couldn't come together. They couldn't mesh. You know, I felt secretive in some ways. And so to realize that, like, one, you really can't separate those two things. And then two, that you're not separate from the rest of humankind. That was just so helpful for me. And so I never went back. I never went to another meeting.
It was just a cut-off point. You didn't phase out.
No, I mean, not really, because, well, I phased out into drinking, you know, first, and that was just my experience. I didn't feel like I had to drink because I stopped going to meetings. It was more like I wanted to see if I could drink like a normal, if I could drink at normal levels again.
And that's such an important point, because I think that there's this messaging that to leave is to die, or, you know, to drink to die, to, you know, all of those things, that actually to leave means a number of different things. It means what we're doing isn't working.
Right. Yeah. And I actually had stopped going to meetings probably 6 months before I drank. And I thought about it long and hard, and did some research. And so, yeah, it wasn't like, whoops, didn't go to meetings, fell off the wagon, and boom, my life was destroyed. No, I actually, like, made all these, like, conscious steps. And so, you know, in stopping again, I just never went back to meeting. That's not true. I went back to one meeting after like a year or two of sobriety, just to see old friends. And that was something interesting. You know, we talk about leaving. I had friends that didn't want to be my friend unless I went to meetings. And so I guess those aren't friends. So I popped into a meeting and I heard a lot of the same people sharing the things that I had heard 5 years prior, and just you know, talk to some people. People ask me, oh, you gotta keep coming back to meetings. You gotta start going to meetings again, and blah blah blah. And I said, no, I'm doing great. I don't think I will. I just came to say hi to everyone. And then I realized that I didn't need to say hi to any of them. There was no point in that. And then I never went back. So that was kind of my like research into potentially being just social through AA, and that there was no point. So,
and I think that's a really important point, because that's something that comes up in the group a lot, that people think that they had long-standing friendships that a place where they finally felt safe to be, and to be themselves, but also we're talking about a level of intimacy that really we only reserve for therapists or a partner. And then to strip that away is hurtful.
Yeah.
And it's hurtful to learn that our relationships are contingent on membership to AA.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess there's a process of depersonalization too, right? We realize that it's not about them, it's about the programming that I'll pose this as a question. How did you feel that people related to you once you had left?
It was really just hard with, it was hard with a couple people that we had shared the same sponsor. And like you said, we were intimate on a level that you don't get. And it wasn't even like I hung out with them really necessarily outside, but we would meet once a week at my sponsor's house and just share all kinds of womanly things, and that was just gone. And and a couple of them I had connections with outside of there. Like one was yoga, and she just didn't want to, it was like she didn't even want to go to yoga with me unless we went to a meeting afterward. And it was just like, I don't know, it was kind of shocking, but honestly, it wasn't that hard for me to get over it. And then I had another friend in the same group who she wanted to get into running, and I was really into running. And so she said, will you help me run? And we ran together. And there's something that happens on a run or a hike with people that, you just open up and you just start talking. And so we continued to have a friendship for years, and, we're still friends. And she lives far away now, unfortunately, so we don't run together, but we're still friends. But she was just more open. She said, okay, I get, that, and she's still very active in 12-step, and she just was open to understanding that maybe for me it was different. So I do think that there are people that can understand, but the rest of them, we just like best of luck to them. I don't need that. I don't need that negativity,
And for me, it was easier too, because I moved continent, so I did attend AA and NA for a few months when I got here, but it was easy, at that point to realize like the issues were so much more illuminated over here that it was easier to leave. But it also surprises me still that the programming is such that we're seen as a threat, right? We represent returning to use, and it's simply untrue. As you just demonstrated. So
my husband is also sober. He's 13 years. We actually started our recovery journeys around the same time, but he didn't relapse as many times as I did, or ever, I don't think. But he also left AA right before we met, actually, which is why we work so well together. But he's experienced that. There was actually because he was just delved in for like 10 years and just some really close relationships and things like that. And there were rumors going around about him that he drank. It's so bizarre. Like we're just over here living our lives, not minding anybody's business. And he heard not too long ago that everyone thought he had left AA because he was drinking. And so anyway, it made me think of that. But yeah, I really want to, what time is it? I really want to talk about Phoenix a little bit.
Tell us your pathway recovery now. Tell us.
Yes. So sorry, my little one, she's putting Band-Aids on my elbow just in case I have a boo-boo. We need Band-Aids. She's obsessed with Band-Aids. It's very bizarre.
That's very cute.
But yeah, so it was maybe about a year and a half or 2 years. I actually don't know my actual sobriety date. That's another fun fact. When I got sober again, I just like one day I was like, okay, I'm not going to have any more wine. And I don't actually remember what day that was. I know it was somewhere around the end of October. And I know what year it was. It was about 6.5 years ago. So I don't, when I returned, I also stopped that like obsession of time and things like that, because I thought, well, if I ever drink again, it's not about time, and it's not about resetting and things like that. So I didn't actually choose to focus on a sobriety date. And so about a year and a half or 2 years in, I had opened a couple of fitness franchises that were group fitness franchises, and learned kind of some of the power of community that can exist through fitness, and then all these other things in my personal recovery. And I thought, I've got all these secret weapons for what's helpful for me in recovery, and like, how do I share that with others? And I had this calling that, I am using these fitness gifts to make somebody else money, and like that. Like, yes, I'm helping some people, but like, I feel like I did really give it to the recovery community. And I found this organization through like pure dumb luck of like searching job boards, of trying to figure out, well, what's even out there for someone with my skill sets in the recovery world. And I found this organization called the Phoenix. It was actually called Phoenix Multisport back then. Thank you for all those Band-Aids. I appreciate it. And some of my first experiences with this organization were, one, watching the founder, whose name is Scott Strode. He's amazing. Do a TEDx talk in a shirt that looks like this, in front of the whole world, talking about recovery and being open about it. And also, this organization was doing all these things that I love, and really thriving in recovery through hiking and rock climbing and fitness and yoga and meditation and social stuff. And it was like, oh my God, this exists. I had no idea. It was founded about 13 or 14 years ago, right when I was first, trying to quit drinking. And I had never heard of it. And I landed a position as the director for the Phoenix and Orange County. And what it is it's a sober, active community. And like I said, we're doing all kinds of activities. And it's all completely free for anyone with 48 hours of sobriety. And that's really important to us, because we want to make sure that there's as little barrier to entry as possible. Like 12-step has no barrier to entry, but for me, when I was relapsing, it had a 30-day barrier to entry, that newcomer chip. I was like, I want to wait 30 days to go back, because I don't want to pick up that newcomer chip and be embarrassed and have all these people tell me what I should and shouldn't do. But anyway, I digress. So we have that 48 hours because we want people to, one, be safe. If you're still detoxing, it's probably not safe to lift a barbell over your head. But also, we want people to get back in really quickly if they do have a return to using or drinking. We are also open to anyone who chooses a sober lifestyle. So you don't have to necessarily identify as in recovery. We're open to allies and supporters of not only the recovery movement, but loved ones in recovery. So, people can bring their families or their spouse or their friends into the recovery journey. And that really, it just takes down those ideas. I can't tell you how many people who aren't in recovery come to Phoenix and are just like blown away by just the relationships had there. You know, people come in with all kinds of preconceived notions about people in recovery, and Phoenix is just smashing those down, because here's a bunch of people just thriving and finding connections and truly living in recovery. And that's an amazing thing. And so that, you know, that kind of final step for me allowed me to really step into the space of who I am without having to keep anything separate or hidden. And that was really helpful for me. Not saying that everyone needs to go shout their recovery story from a mountaintop. That might not be helpful for everyone, but just the fact that, you know, if I'm at a dinner party or something like that, I don't feel the need to like hide anything, you know, or on social media or anything like that. So, but Phoenix really is fueling and creating this movement. And for those of you watching, you can find us at thephoenix.org. We have a lot of local in-person programs in about 45 cities across the US now. We are working our way to Canada, possibly. There's some interest up there in starting some chapters. So we're looking at like, okay, how do we legally do that as a national nonprofit? Oh, and in the UK, one of the, you know, there's not a whole lot of silver linings to you know, the pandemic over the last year, but you know, what our big pie in the sky dream is that anyone who needs or wants Phoenix should have it in their community. And part of that vision was a virtual platform, and we were going to do it at some point in the next 5 years. And so this just shifted the timeline up. Within 48 hours of having to shut down all our gyms back in, you know, March of last year, we had launched this virtual platform, and we're running over 50 classes a week for people to plug into from anywhere. And so we've had people plug in from the UK, we've had people plug in from Australia, and probably a bunch of other countries I don't know about. But it's just so cool. I mean, people can plug in truly from anywhere. And we created some on-demand programs that through a partnership, we were able to get into prisons, and people who are incarcerated are doing Phoenix on iPads in the prison, which is just like so cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So we work with a lot of different populations, and we truly want to be there for everyone. In the last month, we also just launched this amazing volunteer platform that can allow anyone, let's say you wanted to start a volunteer program right in your community, and you and a couple friends want to start doing pickleball every Thursday evening and call it Phoenix. We have training programs, and we have this online volunteer platform where volunteers can connect and create Phoenix in their own communities. So you don't even need staff there. We'll give you staff support from afar, but it's just really cool, because that is just the tip of the iceberg for fueling this movement of, you know, volunteers starting Phoenix in any community they want to, and helping us really spread our wings.
I think it's amazing, and what I love about it is how much it aligns with my perspective around recovery, which is just that it's about strengths-based approaches, right? What better way to empower yourself to recover than to be strong? Yeah. I love that, and that you still get the elements of community. And I'm curious about the accessibility of the online program. So in the gyms, it was more of a weight-based Was it more weight-based?
Well, not necessarily. So Phoenix did partner. We did adopt CrossFit as part of our model when we were building some gyms many years ago. So that was just a piece of it, but we were still doing rock climbing and hiking and run walks and yoga and things like that. And we've realized that we need to diversify even further. I mean, inclusivity and accessibility are like cornerstones of the Phoenix model. And so to do that, we've started introducing book clubs and more socials. We do here in Orange County, we do a bonfire at the beach once a month where we're playing games and sharing, stories and laughs and bringing our kids and stuff like that. And so, the virtual programming has everything from those, like a book club to a meditation to a workout you can do with or without equipment. And so, and to your point about strengths, I think people do need things that help them feel empowered. And there's two things about Phoenix that do that. And one is having this community of people that believe in you, similar to those leaders at the gym that believed in me, all those years ago was such a cornerstone for me. Coming into this huge organization and this community of people that also believe in me is just so empowering. And then the other thing, when it does come to fitness, is no matter where you're starting, you're gonna get stronger. Even if you can only walk for 5 minutes, eventually you're gonna be able to walk for 6 and walk for 7 and maybe start jogging someday. And those little, you can go outside. You want to go outside? It was raining earlier. Those little achievements help start to build that self-esteem, and it's very empowering to feel like, okay, if I can accomplish that, if I can finish that run, oh my God, I never thought I would run. If I can do that, maybe I can stay sober too. And it's just that works. And we do actually, I won't get into all the data and stuff, but we've done a ton of data studies on recovery capital itself, and the chime, we call it the chime, or SAMHSA calls it the chime model of recovery, but it's connectedness, empowerment. I forget what they all, I'm gonna butcher it if I try to think of what they all are, but participants in Phoenix see over 90% improvement in the first 90 days of attending Phoenix in recovery capital. And so, I mean, that's for people new in recovery. We gather data from all kinds of people, but what's particularly interesting are the people who come in who identify as new to recovery, because that's where the most dramatic change usually happens. And over 90% of them are seeing significant increases in recovery capital. So that's pretty awesome, and we're pretty excited about that. And we don't consider length of sobriety necessarily a marker of success, but also what we find is that over 87% of them are still sober at that 90-day mark also. So huge. It's huge.
That's really incredible, and so interesting, because we don't hear enough about the different pathways of recovery, but the different approaches to recovery. So who'd have thought, that exercise and community together would form the basis of a really successful model of recovery? I love hearing stories like this.
Yeah, and the people who started Phoenix, one of my boss is actually one of the founders, and she's got a clinical background. And they really took what they saw working in treatment and in 12-step and in all these different areas, and in therapy and in just social models, and kind of took some pieces of all that to help construct Phoenix and help construct we have what we call it's not a code of conduct, but just we call it our team member agreement, and it helps us keep the community safe, both physically and emotionally safe and inclusive and accessible, and all of that went into starting Phoenix informed that approach. And we are open to all pathways. You know, a lot of people still participate in Phoenix and 12-step, or all kinds of other things.
It's a truly inclusive environment. I am conscious of the time, so I want to ask if folks have questions, and they can come forward and ask those. And also, one of my questions for the group is people can access the Phoenix for free, and we're going to talk about how we could potentially maybe try some programming in the group so that people can access it too. But let's see if folks have questions. Anyone? I feel like I've asked all the questions. I could ask you questions all day. It is it's fascinating to me that you know, I mean, exercise has been a big part of my recovery, and I do notice that, you know, if I don't exercise regularly, it significantly impacts my mood. We do have a question. So
CJ, I did some Googling, to be honest, and I didn't choose him because he didn't support AA. I didn't know that. And he would have supported it if it was working for me, I think, you know, and I chose him because I was engaged to somebody I shouldn't have been engaged to, and needed someone who also could help me with that. And so he was a marriage and family therapist, but then also had, he had some, sort of Eastern approaches and spiritual approaches listed as part of his practice, and that was interesting to me. And then also had just addiction listed as something that he focused on, and that's actually really hard to find. Our therapists who help people, just, you know, people in recovery or still actively in substance use disorder. So that was how I chose him, and it just turns out that, you know, that he was the right one for me to figure out this piece of my life, for sure.
I think you make such an important point that there is a lack of experience among therapists in addiction. I mean, even in my grad school, where I'm training to be a clinical social worker, the program, the semester on addiction is not where I would expect it to be. So yeah,
well,
I think
same thing, even with medical doctors too.
And I guess
amazing.
It is amazing, and I guess too, there's such a broad spectrum of things that people have to learn that, you know, I mean, I come from a family of doctors, so I kind of understand that, you know, you have to focus on one area. But yeah, I do struggle with it, and I think that, so the question we were asked is, you know, how do you find a therapist that doesn't support AA? And I think the important thing to do is, if you do find a therapist that is only pro AA, then actually I'm not so sure that they're the most you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the most open-minded therapist, right? Because if they're just pushing the program of recovery, then it doesn't mean that their knowledge is up to date.
Yeah, and actually that was the one thing I was looking for, Liv, was an open-minded therapist, and just everything that he had kind of listed as some areas of expertise and approaches said to me that this guy was open-minded. And so I think that was really the, you know, what worked for me.
Yeah, and you can usually notice it with the language that they use pretty early on. You know, I think people forget that they can interview therapists. It's not just that they are the person interviewing you, you know, it's about fit. Any closing thoughts?
Does anyone else have any questions?
None are coming up yet.
Yeah, no, I just, again, you know, really appreciate the forum that you provide, Liv, you know, in much of my work, and even here, I find it so important not to bash or close off the idea that 12-step might work for some people. And you know, that lends itself to me as like, I wish people in 12-step were open-minded to the opposite, right? And so now, as a person kind of outside of that, I want to make sure that I don't shut that idea off for other people, or that possibility off for other people. I mean, I found it very, you know, there's a lot of things I often want to say about damaging, how damaging it can be, because that was my experience. But anyway, I think, you know, in order to change what recovery looks like for people, we have to be examples and beacons of this idea that like anything's possible for people in recovery, and people can choose whatever they want.
Yeah,
so,
and thank you for saying that, because
really my
that's sorry, it just broke. That, I think that's a really important point about members of this group, which is, you know, our culture is that we can discuss what didn't work, but you know, there's two sides to a coin, right? It is a valid pathway of recovery, and you know, our purpose here is not to bash, but to validate concerns, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a really valid point. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you all.
You've put the link here, so it's thephoenix.org.
Yeah, and I'll share it again. I've shared it before in the group, but I'll share it again too, with a link to how to register for any events or things like that.
Yeah, and we can put that link on YouTube. I'll put some links to the books that you mentioned as well. I'll take a note of those. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And
you want to say bye-bye?
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you to everyone for attending. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.